Chapter 1. There are two types of soldiers. The ones who want to fight, and the ones who have to fight. Cleric Joran. Advanced Courtier in Military Tactics, Volume 2.
Pol rubbed his light brown face with both hands as he sat up. His 16-year-old body had woken without difficulty, as it did every morning before dawn, but it always took a moment to clear his head. Daytime naps required a longer wake-up period, and his sisters would often play pranks, taking advantage of his post-sleep confusion. Sitting on the floor of the dark bedroom, his hands brushed the still warm crimson blanket laid out beneath him that had served as his bed for years. His grandmother, who had passed a few years before, had sewn it and gifted it to him for festival. Pol treasured the blanket and its connection to the woman who had been so kind. His grandfather had built the bedroom and second-floor living quarters atop their family store years ago. Pol didn't mind sleeping on the floor his family had crafted with love. Some mornings, he wondered if a cot or bed might provide a better night's sleep, but those luxuries could not fit in the single room above his family's cobbler shop, where his parents and two sisters continued sleeping with soft breathing. The blanket would do. As Pol's thoughts cleared, he felt the wood floor for his garments he had laid out the night before. Where most young men his age might sleep past daybreak, Pol had a legacy to fulfill. Maybe not the legacy his father wanted, but each morning he set out for Dale Keep to make his grandparents and uncle proud. Occasionally, when he pushed himself up off the floor to begin his day, Pol sometimes paused for a second and wondered what might happen if he laid back down to get a little more sleep. Uncle Ish had told him many times not to ignore the distracting thoughts, but instead own them and embrace them. He said, when you conquer those moments, you conquer yourself. In the dark, Pol quietly changed into his clothes, a brown training tunic and leather training shoes with padded soles, his favorite pair. He couldn't remember how many times he had repaired those shoes, but there were some benefits to being a cobbler's son. Pounding on the front door jarred Pol from his thoughts. He jumped off the warm blanket, hoping the loud percussion wouldn't wake the rest of the family as early as it was. Maybe a neighbor in trouble? Pol raced down the stairs, across his father's cobbler shop and to the familiar green-painted front door. He deftly unbolted the 3 locks, and when the door opened, a pair of muddy leather shoes smacked his face. Surprised, Pol fell back a step. He could barely see past the mud covering the left side of his face, but he mustered his discipline and clamped his mouth upon recognizing the culprit. Emerald velvet robes clung to an obese man, standing in the threshold with flushed cheeks. He leaned forward and pointed a chubby finger at Pol, who cast his gaze down as was expected of a commoner. Pol had recognized the jeweled silver brooch on the double lapel, signifying a Dal, a son of a Dom, a nobleman of Courtier. Pol specifically remembered repairing this man's shoes a week ago. "Do you know who I am, boy?" No. If you knew who I was, I wouldn't have garbage for shoes. You helped your father fix my shoes. If you knew who I was, then you would have done your job. Wincing at the fetid alcohol breath, Pol lifted his hand to wipe the mud that was covering his left eye. The drunk noble, Dal Marwyn, caught Pol's wrist before his hand could reach his face. Again, Pol drew upon the discipline he had spent 6 years perfecting with his uncle and didn't move. But a spark of anger flared. Pol fought back the instinct to fling the doll onto his back, begging for mercy. "I didn't tell you to wipe that, boy. Now pick up my shoes." He released Pol's wrist, and Pol exhaled slowly, quietly, and retrieved the muddy shoes. The plush, soft leather had separated from the sole with obvious tears and damage to the toe. It seemed likely that the doll had been kicking some innocent object during the previous evening's drunken revelry. It also seemed likely that the doll didn't want to pay a new repair bill. "I paid your father good money to have these fixed, and now look at them. Look at them." The spark of anger ignited into a small whisper of flame, hovering above the coals within Pol's soul. Only the discipline contained the heat. "I have to meet with Ver Einrig for lunch today. These shoes better be ready by then. If they are not, every noble in the city will hear of your father's failure." Pol would not dishonor his father. "Yes, Doll Marwyn." The doll slapped Pol across the face, mud flinging to the floor. Pol did not budge. He did not trust his natural instincts, which might seriously injure the man before him. Doll Marwyn wiped his hand over Pol's tunic. "So you remember me? That was a lesson to never let this happen again. Your father should have taught you better." Pol kept his eyes cast down. "Holding your tongue takes more effort than speaking your mind, but sometimes it's the best answer." His father's words flowed through his mind, but the angry flame in his soul flared. The noble sneered and made a wobbly about face. His servant opened the door to his black carriage and had to assist the fat doll back into his vehicle. Pol remained still, watching the carriage lurch forward, as if more inebriated than its owner. One more year, and Pol could leave. He wondered if the anger in his heart would burn the mud off his tunic and face. He heard footsteps behind him and recognized his father's approach. Pol still didn't move. Leor stepped around and faced his son with a towel in hand. He said nothing, and Pol refused to look him in the eye as his father gently wiped the mud away. When Pol could open his eye, he released his fists. "Sorry, Pol." He didn't respond. His father had allowed him to endure worse. Pol heard someone come down the stairs and turned to find his mother, with tears coursing down her cheeks, waiting on the bottom stair. The soul flame blossomed into a fire. He did not want to see his mother troubled. Pol had to leave. He said to her, "I'm okay." She nodded, and he left, pushing the door open past his father, who followed him outside. Everything in Pol's heart told him to run and leave his father behind, but he knew better. "Let it out, Pol." No. He had unleashed a fiery tirade upon his father before, and regretted it. While Pol appreciated his father's insight into his heart, he did not approve of his father's motives. Pol kept his head down and followed the street to Dale Keep, where he went every morning before sunrise. No, this wouldn't work. If he didn't vent a little, he would explode. "You let it happen," Pol said softly, not trusting himself to speak louder. "Yeah, that was a tough one. Proud of how you handled it." The fire within raged. Is that all he was going to say? Pol kept his voice low. "Proud for taking another hit. We both know you're strong enough to have leveled Doll Marwyn to the ground. It takes a true man to resist violence, even when it's most deserved. But he'll do it again, and again. I'll take care of his shoes and talk to him when he's sober, Pol. Thank you for considering our family." The flames burst into a bonfire. We're at their mercy. Their business feeds us. You don't slap the hand that feeds you. Pol let a bit of rage slip. I'd rather starve. He balled his hands into fists. I can't fight back. You won't even let me fight anyone besides Uncle Ish, even to help. Silence. In the early morning dark, their footfalls on the dirt road made the only sound. Pol did not care if he had overstepped his place. When you're on your own, you can make that choice. Just like our ancestors did. Just like my father did. Until then, I need your help to feed your sisters. Pol wanted to wrestle his father to the ground and shout in his face, "You're wrong!" But Pol did not want to disrespect his father or hear another lecture about grandfather's poor choices. So he clamped his lips together. Uncle Ish's words flashed from memory. You gonna let that anger control you? Discipline tempered the rage and reined in the heat. Pol focused on his surroundings out of habit because an emotional fighter loses sight of the goal. This close to Dale Keep, near the city centre, the muddy road ended and the cobblestone streets began. Their footfalls sounded louder on the stone, but the well-fitting stones and smooth footing attested to Cordian engineering and attention to detail. Footsteps echoed nearby from a scattering of apprentice bakers commuting to their shops. Servants also scurried about, acquiring last-minute ingredients for their master's breakfast. Few others had reason to be up this early. Pol did. Every quiet morning, except Point Day, he travelled the barely lit dirt roads to the Quon Guard garrison, nestled inside Dale Keep, where Quon Douringer, the ruler of Dale, lived. Pol made that trip every morning to fulfill his mission, his purpose. He was not about to let his anger slip any further and risk his father cancelling his training. If he had hurt that doll, he would have been barred from training. Pol could not have that. As if the god of Cordier, Loam, desired to calm his rage, cold, fat raindrops assaulted Pol's head as he approached the gates to Dale Keep. He ran a hand through his dark brown hair and removed a few more chunks of mud. At least the muddy remnants on his face would wash off easier. Stars faded in the pre-dawn firmament when Pol and his father reached the immense gate. 30 feet of expertly crafted stone, wood, and iron rose before him in a constructed bastion of defence, with 6 Quon guards at attention. The rain had drenched their red and white checkered tunics, and as Pol and his quiet father approached, a few gave a nod of recognition, but the rest ignored them. Almost every day for the last 6 years, Pol had passed through the imposing gates before dawn on his way to the Quon Guard garrison. Most citizens would not be permitted inside Dale Keep that early without reason, but Uncle Ish served on the Quon Guard, and Pol was well known. The subset of aging stone buildings comprising the garrison sat within the inner bailey against the keep's outer wall. With his rage smouldering, Pol found little comfort in that familiar smithy's iron hammer ringing out amidst a sporadic horse's whinny as the front bailey came alive with morning chores. Even the scent of morning bread didn't bring the usual satisfaction. Deeper within the inner bailey, they approached the garrison entrance. Miltu stood guard by himself in the torchlight and waved to Pol as he approached.
Morning, Pol, Leo. Good to see you escorting the lad. A wet one, isn't it?
Pol's anger wavered a smidge. Miltu had said good morning to him for years. Yes, sir. Business going well? Leor asked. The guard had a small wooden toy business on the side. Pol's father had even agreed to host a display in his shop.
Of course. Won't retire anytime soon, but it's fun. Ish has been up for a while. Says he's got a surprise for Pol today. Wonder if he's trying to make you quit training with those surprises.
Pol almost let a smile slip, but held on to his anger. They'll prepare me for the king's army, Miltu chuckled. Ish hasn't convinced you to the quon guard yet. Not yet. Miltu inspected Pol. You okay, Pol? What happened to your face? His father said, Run in with one of my customers. Thanks for asking. Gotcha. One of those mornings, huh? Get you going. Ish'll work it out of you. Pol nodded to the older quon guard as he trekked across the muddy garrison courtyard. The garrison armory sat in the west wall, and faint candlelight flickered from the room onto the muddy courtyard. Pol wiped his leather shoes on the outside mat and stepped inside, finding his Uncle Ish burnishing a shield. His uncle paused mid-stroke, looked Pol up and down, and asked, That bad? Leor entered behind Pol. That bad. Ish answered himself. He returned the gleaming kite shield to a rack. Was going to wait for the rain to pass, but you look like a spring that's about to pop off. Go get ready. Pol stepped around his father without a look and pulled a wooden sword from a barrel outside the armory. He hung back, waiting under the armory awning for his uncle. Thanks, Ish, his father said. What happened? Pol answered the door. Ish shook his head and said, One of these days he might not hold back. That's the day we end up on the streets. It's not that bad, Leo. How can you say that? Cousin Akrin's family's homeless. No one has heard from Felter in years. Why? Because of a legend. He held up a finger. No lectures. You're here, you're keeping the family tradition, and I support you. That's what Father wanted. I'm doing the best I can with what he didn't give me. That was your choice. Ish dropped his head and held up his hands. Let's not do this now. Father loved you too, Leo. He would have been proud to see Pol train. I hear the words. I'm trying to believe. Ish patted his brother's shoulder. I'll send him home at the usual time. Thank you. Leor left the armory and joined Pol outside. Work hard. See you later. Yes, sir, Pol replied. With his head down, his father trod out the garrison in the rain. Pol wanted to say more, but didn't trust his mouth. He loved his father, but he was ashamed of him. Ish brushed past him, taking a position in the center of the courtyard and holding his own sword and wooden shield. Get it out. Don't hold the anger in, it'll poison you. Ish saluted Pol, holding up his sword. Pol returned the salute and held it as he allowed all the frustration, the anger, the words, the humiliation, and the things unsaid to build into a roaring, fiery torrent inside him. Gripping his wooden sword until his fingers blanched, Pol charged his uncle. The young man poured his fury into the overhead swing. His wooden sword splintered, and his uncle's wooden shield cracked on the first contact. Ish laughed. Ha ha! Now that's what I call letting it out. Again. Pol grunted and took the shield from his uncle and laid the broken weapons by the armory before retrieving new ones. There's plenty more. Let's go, his uncle said. Some of the fire had been released, but not all. Pol charged again, and instead of a colossal blow, he directed his energy into speed. He had to be faster without a shield, a natural disadvantage Ish had placed on him a year before. The clack of the wood on wood was cathartic. Sparring with someone who could take his hits invigorated him. Pol's wooden sword blurred, but he couldn't land a hit. Ish defended well and had the advantage. As they continued, Pol felt the anger release from him like vapor from the dew-covered ground. They sparred for a half hour, back and forth. Pol knew all of Ish's moves, patterns, and techniques, but his excessive use of speed placed him at a disadvantage. He would tire first. Seeking an advantage, Pol advanced with 2 quick swipes, meeting both sword and shield. Then, Pol feinted a swing at the shield before kicking it at an angle. The shield flew from Ish's grasp, and when the expected counter-sword thrust came, Pol stepped inside the thrust and held Ish's offending arm. He ploughed his right fist, holding his sword hilt, into his uncle's stomach. A grunt rewarded his effort, but Pol's feet flew out from under him. The back of his head cracked against the muddy courtyard stone. The tip of a heavy wooden sword pressed against his chest. Breathing hard, Ish lifted his sword. Excellent work. Disarming and pressing into the attacked. With limited space, it's smart to improvise with your fist. A wry grin spread across Uncle Ish's face. You might want to take a crack at the face instead. He held out his hand. Pol let his uncle haul him to his feet. Didn't want to explain to father that I broke your nose. Ish grimaced. Thank you. Good job releasing your anger, but you left yourself open. Hard to let it go. It gives me strength. Ish held up a finger. If you ever want a chance at achieving the full potential of the Vroshan line, I must remove all limitations, especially anger. Knowing it and doing it are 2 different things. Loam gives you strength, anger weakens you. Emotions are fleeting, you can't rely on them. Discipline will never fail. Loam will never fail you. Yes, sir. Pol did not fully understand, but he trusted his uncle. Ish gave him a tentative glance. The fire you described, inside yourself, is it raging right now? It was. It's smaller now. Why? Pol didn't hide his eagerness. Uncle Ish rarely wanted to discuss the inner fire. Another time. We have more work to do. Uncle Ish walked over to the armory. Pol stifled his disappointment. He desperately wanted to learn more about the fire within his soul, a source of strength deep within and visible to his mind's eye. But his uncle always shied away from the subject. Resigned to silence, Pol scraped the excess mud off his soaking tunic and ragged dark brown pants. At least his clothes matched his face. He caught Miltu laughing from the gate. His uncle shelved his shield and pulled out 3 boar swords from the training barrel. Surprise! They both now had 2 swords. This was Pol's favorite style. His uncle could always make him smile. Now, focus. Don't allow anger to overwhelm you. And don't break my nose, Ish smirked as he advanced. He must enjoy this as much as Pol did. Pol brought 6 years of training to bear. Their swords flew, and as usual, Pol did his best to match his uncle's speed. But when Ish's sword rapped his undefended left wrist, the sword almost dropped, and Pol had the tip of another sword at his throat. Good. It's nice to know I still have something to teach you. Always, Uncle. Then learn one more thing. Your father allows you to learn our ancestral way of fighting. Allow him to follow his own path. The fatigue took the edge off of Pol's emotions. But it's not what he was made for. He knows it. Doesn't matter. It's his choice. When a choice allows a doll to throw muddy shoes in my face, I take issue. Do you know how many times I've had to hold back, even against thieves? Well said, but you're Cordiaean. Obedience is life, Pol finished. Which is why having that choice, ordered to truth, is important. Respect it. Without it, we live under tyranny. He held up a finger. Don't even think it. He allows you a choice, or you wouldn't be here. That's him obeying his father. Uncle Ish knew Pol well. I am grateful. I just know what he could have been. That's not for you to decide or grieve. As long as it's ordered to truth, accept his choice just as he accepts yours. He clapped Pol on the back. Enough. Let's finish before you have to go peek at Quelladil. Pol sputtered. What? Didn't think I knew why you leave just after sunrise, take the same route, and always arrive home a touch late? For someone who dislikes nobles as much as you do, you sure seem to have a crush on one. Pol hung his head. I'm defeated. But you're a stalker. No, I'm a quon guard who is well informed about everything regarding the quon's family, including his daughter. Now, let's finish up. After another hour with his pants covered in mud, Pol could weave a proper defense, but the forearm welts would bruise the next day. Ish held up a sword. I know you could do this all day, but it's time. With a small bow, Pol replied, Thank you, Uncle, for training in the rain. Rain, sun, snow. You must be ready. Now, go work hard for your father so he doesn't give me any grief. Yes, sir. Ish ruffled Pol's close-cropped dark brown hair. At 6'5", Ish stood an inch taller than Pol and towered over most other guards. I know you will. You landed a fist to my gut. Not many guards can boast of that. The right corner of Pol's mouth turned up slightly. He was proud of that hit. That's all the smile I'm going to see. If you change your mind about the quon guard, you can start right away. The age limit's 16. You're already there. Pol said, Thank you, but no. King's army for me. That's what grandfather and you did. Ish said, Captain wanted me to try. Yelling from the garrison entrance interrupted them. Pol turned to find the quon guard captain, Urtel, storming toward them with a flushed face and a slew of hissed curses dropping from his lips. Miltu received the captain's helmet as the officer barged past. Pol, get going. He's in a mood, his uncle said. Pol nodded, handing off his wooden swords before retreating toward the far wall. He had witnessed the captain's temper before and had no desire to remain. Captain Urtel marched right up to Ish. He just wanted a ride, Ish. He just wanted a ride without being bothered. His uncle kept a passive face and didn't respond. Do you think I'm a bother, Ish? No, Captain. That's right. The captain looked around, found Pol and pointed. Let me tell you something, boy. If you want to join us, learn here and now that the safety of the quon goes before your own life, even if we are a bother. Pol nodded, but continued to move to the gate as the captain turned back to Ish. But we have to obey, Ish. Yes, Captain. Get cleaned up and have a detail prepared to meet the quon's carriage when he returns. The captain ploughed his fist into his palm. At least he'll see we remain prepared to serve. Yes, Captain. Ish stood to the side as the officer pushed past him. Pol scooted out the garrison gate, waving to Miltu standing at attention and holding the captain's helmet. The inner bailey buzzed with more activity, and the rain had passed. After a quick glance at the morning sun's position, Pol returned his vision to the muddy ground. He would have plenty of time to make it to his father's shop before it opened. Pol considered the captain's words to him. Yes, as a quon guard, placing the quon before your own life made sense. That was the job. But guarding nobles didn't appeal to Pol at all. No. He wanted the king's army grunt uniform. The first step to becoming an officer, just like his grandfather and uncle. And nothing would stop him.